You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson from Proteum Machining, and this week I am joined by Noah Graff. Welcome, Noah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. It's nice to be on somebody else's show as opposed to just interviewing other people.
Well, so for those who maybe don't listen to your show or know who you are you, what do you do, and all that good stuff?
Well, I'm Noah Graff. I am a used machine tool dealer, work in a family business for that. And we also have a website blog about the precision machining industry. And about 4 years ago, I started a podcast called Swarfcast. That's SWARFCAST. It's about precision machining, turned parts. I have more of a background in screw machines, multi-spindle screw machines, and Swiss screw machines. But we touch on all kinds of things, some of the things that are similar to this podcast. So
yeah, actually, I found your podcast through a past guest of this podcast, Dan Rudolph, and he was on there a couple times. And I've listened to a handful of them, and I
such
really
a cool
enjoy
guy, Dan Rudolph. Cool guy.
Yeah, he is. He's wonderful. Well, let's get into your backstory then. How did you get to doing all these things, used machinery dealer and podcasts and all of that? Where did this all start?
Nepotism. My used to be more self-conscious about that, but eventually you just, you become more comfortable with yourself. My grandfather started Graff-Pinkert in 1941, started buying and selling used machinery, and he worked with his father doing scrap metal for a minute, and then he met some used machinery dealers in his exploits, and he saw they were just like making tons of money, and he was like, this seems like a much better business, and started going around the country buying like old mills and stuff, and he had a book. He found this book called the Emmerman Catalog that had prices of machines from a few years before, I think. And then he used that as a guide for when he was trying to price machines. And, he worked in the business a while. He actually then in World War II, he made parts for World War II on Davenport screw machines. And then later my father and my uncle went into the business. My uncle doesn't work with us anymore. He's got his own business. And then I was about 24, 25. I was getting out of college. I'd lived in Italy a little bit after college. And then I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I was a film major in college. And my dad, he was a journalism major in college, and he had started about maybe 4 or 5 years before, he had started a print magazine about machining called Today's Machining World.
Right. And when we spoke, I'd seen that years and years ago when it was still print.
Wow.
I know the font and everything. Like I've seen the hard copy, but now it's strictly online, right?
Yeah. Actually, he was totally ahead of his time. Like when he came up with it in 2000, he's like, I think, let's just make this online. Let's just, let's become like an online zine, and maybe we'll sell out or something. And and then, he was just a little too ahead of his time. So he decided to make it into a print magazine, which was, very involved. And then I didn't really know what I wanted to do. He tried to lure me in to, I don't know, but, he gave me an opportunity. He said, look, why don't you come in and, we'll do interviews with people, and you can videotape them, and broadband's coming, and we'll put it online. And this is like 2005, and it's just a little too early.
Okay.
But I did, and I made training videos for working with screw machines, and And then I started editing and writing for the magazine and getting more and more involved in that. And I did that for a few years. And then 2011 came, print was dead, and we decided, let's just take it online. Let's just, we'll mainly do blogs. We do 2 blogs a week. It's generally one blog he writes, and then I either write a blog or do a podcast. And then we have, industry news and other stuff like that, other videos, etc. So then in 2011, I started going into the machinery business, which I like to call the treasure hunting business. It was I had mixed feelings about it. Wasn't sure if it was the right thing. I always considered myself sort of a media person. And, I was talking with somebody about it, and they said, because I've always been making some documentaries on the side too. And the last documentary I made was this documentary about all the Chicago locations of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And like I went to every location, from like the Sears Tower to like all the backyards he goes to, like where the whole dancing scene is. We got a Ferrari and went around the city. And the whole thing was this like hunt to try to figure out where everything is, because, you sort of have ideas, but, and this guy is like, well, it sounds like you're a treasure hunter. You like finding things and discovering things. And, the used machinery business, it's like the treasure hunting. It's a big treasure hunt. You go all over the world to find all kinds of stuff. I've gotten to go to Europe, Asia, South America, all kinds of crazy places in the United States to find machines. And, you can characterize the business as buying old, greasy crap that people don't want and then selling it to somebody else, or fixing it up. Or you can see it in a little bit more romantic light. You're finding interesting stuff that people don't exactly know what it's worth. There's a term. Are you familiar with the term sexy ugly?
No, I don't think so.
It's like people, it's sort of a pop cultural term. People, like you look at a guy like Mick Jagger, right? Like,
okay.
He's not a beautiful man, right? But
right.
Many people find him sexy. So, there's certain kinds of machinery, it's dirty. Maybe there's something messed up about it. You have to fix it. But at the same time, although it's ugly, in deep down, it's sexy, because somebody might pay quite a bit for it.
So how much of your work is you guys buying stuff to fix up versus just straight resell?
That is a good question. And I think it's a bit cyclical. Traditionally, we used to buy old mechanical cam multi-spindle screw machines, like Wickman's. Wickman's was kind of our specialty. It's a 6-spindle screw machine, generally 6-spindle, made in England. And we could tear it down to nothing and build it back. And Davenports and Acme's, some of these machines are 50, 60 years old. And that was a great business for a long time. But now less people can run those machines. And, many of the same customers we've had, they've gone to either newer multi-spindles, CNC multi-spindles like Indexes or Schuttas or ZPS Euroturn machines. And then many of the same people who use screw machines all these years, now they use, single spindle lathes and machining centers and a lot of Swiss machines. So we've branched out, but this year, these last 2 years have been, some of the best business in a long time, particularly this year. And we've done quite well. Not selling Wickmans, we sold a few Acme's, and we've sold a lot of Davenports, which
really?
Davenports are you familiar with them? I mean,
No, not at all. So I would have thought at this point that most of your business would have been, Citizens, Stars, things like that. I would have thought that the market for 50, 60-year-old machines at this point
it's
was dead.
it's crazy. I mean, we had a Davenport machine in the 90s. If a Davenport machine in the 90s, a screw machine in the 80s or 90s is considered, if it's a cam machine, it's considered quite young. I'm born in 1980, and I like to say if I was born before that machine came into existence, it's pretty young in screw machine years. So we had this Davenport in the 1990s, like 6 years ago or something, and we kept it for like 2 years. Nobody wanted it, and I was just like, we're never getting a Davenport again. Like this is a bad business. Like
Right.
we need to get out of the Stone Age. Davenports are great because a Davenport design is the same as it was 85 years ago. The design hasn't changed much. I mean, if you ask Davenport, they'll tell you, it's a little more precise, and now they have this CNC Davenport, but overall, the machines are very similar. So anyways, all of a sudden, there's reshoring, nearshoring. There's companies that are, putting their facilities in Mexico. And there's Chinese companies too. We don't love to sell to China, but we will sometimes, particularly like a machine like this.
So you guys sell globally in addition to sourcing globally.
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Generally, the only place in Asia we sell is China, although we sold this sort of esoteric laser ablation machine. We sold that to Malaysia this year. But generally, we've sold quite a bit to South America. I've got a guy I work with closely in Brazil. And I mean, historically, we've sold to like South Africa. We've sold to, all over the place. But
so are you shipping from here to there, or is it typically you're finding something in the same country or same region and then, reselling it, but keeping it in that same region?
Usually it's coming here and then we're selling it somewhere else.
Okay. Well, then to take a quick detour, have you learned any lessons of like how to send things? Because I know a lot of us deal with rigging and the insane costs that it can
have a really good
be.
person in your office that can take care of all the trucking and rigging and deal with logistics. And my God.
Okay.
Yeah, for a little while we were buying stuff in Europe, like in one European country, and selling to another European country. That lasted for a bit, and that was tricky. But usually this is what we're doing. But back to the Davenports. I mean, we've sold probably 100 Davenports this year. Now,
That's crazy.
I know, it's crazy. Granted, there was one deal in which we sold like 30 at a time, but still.
Yeah. I literally did not realize that those were continuing to be sold, new or used. I had no idea.
Yeah. People buy them new.
I just went on their website and like they have the Model B as a new model, and they're like, yeah, since 1900 the Model B has been the most profitable. It's like, geez, okay,
isn't that nuts? I mean, it's nuts. You don't see too many people in Europe with them. You used to. Now, if they want a cam screw machine, they might buy like a Tornos or a Gildemeister or something. But yeah, so they're good for us too, because we have somebody, we have a freelancer who's really good at working on them, repairing them, and it's a machine that somebody might just, they're just not going to be able to sell them themselves.
So to broaden this out, you are a used machinery dealer. What can my audience learn about used machinery from you? Like, how can we? I think we've all dealt with used machinery dealers that kind of strike us like that sleazy car salesman.
Ugh.
And so, how do we know that we're getting the best deal? How do we know that you have actually vetted things? What lessons have you learned in this trade that really kind of
Yeah.
clue you into a good purchase and something
Right.
that, downstream would be a good purchase for us? And what are big red flags when you're looking at a machine to purchase?
That's a good question. Before I hit that, though, I just want to say that, you know, in addition to that stuff, we do some CNC stuff. We are doing a lot of Swiss right now. Right now the market for Swiss is super hot. It's crazy if you can find something decent. If you can find a 2010 machine, it's going to be pretty coveted. That's why we just bought some machines in Japan. But okay, so that is a great question. And the thing is, we're learning all the time about what to do and what not to do because we get burned all the time. My dad he sort of brags about it. He likes to say, we're gamblers. Sometimes we buy stuff and we don't exactly know what we're buying. And he always says, well, we'll learn about it. You buy it and you learn about it.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes you learn badly. So, okay. So let's go through this a couple ways.
Maybe we should start with red flags. So when you go to see a new machine tool, or you have somebody go see it, what are the checklists that you go down? Maybe the top 5 things that you are looking for that says like this is a steaming pile or this is a good buy.
Right. Okay. So, like with multi-spindle screw machines, we'll do that first because that I probably am more of an authority on. Each machine kind of has its own little Achilles heel. You want to look at it. So, for instance, on a Davenport, the head, the carrier, that can have end play in it. So you want to take an indicator or a feeler gauge. You want to put that feeler gauge in there, and you don't want it to be 3 thou or larger. I believe it's 3 thou. If it is, then you're going to need to redo that. And so basically you just stay away from that. If it's an Acme Gridley, that machine really has the big flaw in that machine is its turret. Its carrier has a bronze bushing and it wears. So the machine can get a lot of play over time. So that you need to put an indicator on it and then lift it with a pry bar and see how much play there is. So if it's 2 thou or less, you're good. It's a good machine. If it's 3 thou, it's okay. But once you get higher than that, it's not going to be great for resale. Now, people might be making really good parts on it anyways. There's all kinds of tricks you can do,
Right. Are these the kind of things that you guys will repair if you see something like that and you can get a good price?
Again, so that's one thing that these days, that is something that is really expensive and time consuming to repair because we don't have the ability to grind the stem. So we'll have to send that out to people who don't really care too much about us and are going to want to, who will put it way down the queue, and it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to repair an Acme, because then once you put the carrier in, you have to rebore everything to line it up. Now, I mean, and then there's other things, just looking and knowing what parts are missing and et cetera. And again, if you're a dealer, the machines that you make the most money on are often the dirty ones. And believe it or not, well, you're very mechanical, so you get it. But sometimes the dirty machines are the ones that have been protected the most.
Right.
All that grime on them, the whole turret could be just full of swarf, full of crap. And then you measure that stem and it's awesome. Then Wickman's, there's the flaw in a Wickman is the drum. You open this little door and then you put your finger on the drum, and if it's smooth, then you have a good machine. If it's rough, then don't touch it. Don't buy that machine. It's bad.
Okay.
So
and then what about CNC Swiss? Because I think that's probably what most of my audience will be
boring
at?
people about machines that they're probably not going to buy.
I mean, I think it's very interesting. I mean, the fact that you can determine with like one check the health of those kinds of machines is really nice. I mean, it's not something you
It
can do
is.
on a
It's
CNC usually.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, there could be all kinds of other things wrong with those machines, but that's the one thing where I'm not that mechanically inclined. One of the things I've learned though is to find the one thing you're supposed to feel the flaw on something,
Right.
Okay, so let's go over machines in general. First thing you want to look at, did this machine run water if it's a screw machine? Now, I know like single spindle CNC lathes, those are made to run water. But Swiss machines, even though they're CNC, they're really not good for running water. It could be kept in good shape and maybe you can buy it and make good parts. But if you ever want to resell that thing, no, a machine that could cost $130,000 used retail, maybe somebody will want to pay you $30,000 because all the bearings could be messed up.
And I've heard too that it's near impossible to go from one to the other. And so, like, if somebody has been running it in water, even if it's perfect condition, going to oil or going from oil to water is kind of a no-no because the seals have kind of taken on
Oh, that's interesting.
those oils for, however many years.
So when you want to tell if it's run water or not, you can kind of look inside it and you can see if it looks kind of white and milky. That's a telltale sign if it ran water. A lot of this stuff is you have to learn by screwing up. Like yesterday, we've been fighting this Citizen M32. We bought it in an auction, sight unseen. We're buy stuff sight unseen all the time now because, we're too lazy to travel or, auctions aren't done in person, We saw a video of it running, so that seemed pretty good. We got it and we tried to run it, and then one of the motors seemed to not be working. And,
no.
Well, it gets much worse. In one of these motors, this is a 2001 machine. And so one of these motors for an M32, you'd buy this machine. If you bought it new, it could be up to $500,000. One of these motors, the whole motor new would be like $8,000. So what ended up happening was we thought we screwed up the motor. Then this guy we're very close with sold us a motor that he had on an old machine that he was parting out. We cut the motor. It turned out to be filled with water. That was crazy. It was like it was like a pitcher of water.
That's crazy.
Because the machine had been power washed. So that's another thing that you watch.
No.
So we dried it out and we put it in, and then there was a short on it. And then, somebody else looked at it and they were like, I don't think the motor was the problem. I think that you had a bad harness. Like you had a bad cable connecting the motor.
Oh.
Fried the motor. Then we tried moving this other motor to there. Citizen said to do that, to fix that, and to test it. And then that motor ended up getting fried.
Oh, geez.
I don't know what we're going to do. This seems like a parts machine. So anyways, this guy I work with who used to work for Citizen, he told me, he's like, yeah, you got to be really careful if you're buying like a machine like that, like a Citizen M machine that's that old, because it's complicated.
Well, so that brings up one of the questions that we got from our listeners. And so Tim Hickey asked, what's the most reliable and economical machine to enter the Swiss machining market with? If he's buying one. And I realized as I was reading that question, it kind of brings up the idea of survivorship bias. You know what that is?
No, I like that term.
So it came to real popularity. There's a meme or whatever that pops around for a long time that, like, when they were looking at the B-52s coming back, they were trying to figure out where to place more armor. And they were looking only at the ones that came back. And a statistician, I think, said, that's the wrong way to look at it, because these are the ones who made it back. So anywhere that they're shot means that that's not a vital place. So anywhere that there are not bullet holes is where you need to have armor, because the ones that were shot there are the ones that went down. So I am thinking that since you're buying used machine tools, you are probably buying the ones that people don't want and might not be as reliable. I would think that, especially in the Swiss machine market, anything that's really good, they're going to hold on to until it's scrap metal.
Right now, in this market, true. However, sometimes you have companies that are just, they're making a lot of money and they like to refresh their inventory. And so they're not selling a machine because it's necessarily on its last legs. They just want to go buy a brand new one, and then they've got a 2010 machine they've took care of, and it's great to buy.
Okay.
So
then what is their most reliable one in your opinion that you know, if you see it come up on the market, you're like, oh, I'm snagging that because people will want that?
Yeah, that's okay. So, you know, I think you probably agree that machine tools, brands, sort of like a religion. You know, you have people who work on Citizens, a shop with Citizens, a shop with Stars, a shop with Tsugamis, and generally they want to buy the same one that they have because their people know how to use it, they're comfortable with it, they already have tooling for it. I'd say, you know, the best of breed are Citizen, Tsugami, Star, not necessarily in that order. Tornos is also really good, but that's sort of has less people. It's kind of its own. It's really its own religion. And then Hanwha, which makes, you know, less expensive machines, but a lot of people really like them. Hanwha is the Korean one.
I've never heard of them.
Oh yeah. So when people ask me which Swiss machine they should buy, I usually tell them buy the one that has the best service near you.
I say a similar thing about CNC mills too. People ask me, you know, I love my Brothers, and they're like, oh, should I buy a Brother? I'm like, how good is the service near you? Like, that's really a giant thing. You could have the best machine tool on the planet, and if you can't get it fixed, it's worthless. So to back it up to kind of the entire economic trends, Adam Demuth asked, historically, has your company seen economic trends play out in the used machinery market, either supply side or demand side? If so, any idea which way things are headed now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So right now, and you're in the machining racket, so and I think it's pretty similar whether you're doing milling or turning or whatever. Still looks pretty good. You know, orders are full. The demand is high for parts still. There's sort of a disconnection, I think, between Wall Street and Main Street and the manufacturing world, I think.
It sure seems like it. I know every
so?
salesman I talk to, they're like, how are you doing? And I say, I'm doing great. I am slammed. And they're like, that's what everybody's saying. I don't understand it.
Who's saying that they don't understand that?
Just, you know, that all the salesmen that I talk to that ask me that question,
Like,
you know,
the machine
they don't
tool
understand
salespeople?
Yeah, machine tool sales, tools, just like, you know, cutting tool salesmen, literally anybody I talk to, they all are asking that question and then repeating my own answer back to me, that they're hearing it everywhere, that things are up and everybody's slammed and nobody can keep up. And it seems like such a disconnect with anything you see on the news or out in the world.
I know.
Everybody's like, oh, I got to contract. I gotta be careful. And everybody I talk to, I mean, everybody on the podcast I've had on is just absolutely slammed, it seems like.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is really interesting. You wonder, you know, if it eventually will trickle down.
Right. Well, so your business has been around through many historical trends. Have you guys seen it on your side as a leading indicator or a trailing indicator of kind of the mass recessions, depressions, all of that?
That's a great question. I've thought about it. First of all, here's one problem when you ask a used machinery dealer to evaluate the year and the economy. Like, we don't make tons of deals. We're not selling like zillions of parts. You know, we have a month where we have 3 big deals, and all of a sudden it seems like obviously the economy is amazing.
But something's different if you're selling 100 Davenports. You know, that seems to me, at least on the outside, like that is unheard of.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy. But, you know, we'll work with machines that are a couple $100,000 sometimes versus just machines that, you know, a Davenport, which we might sell for $30,000. You know, it's diverse.
Well, on a more personal note, FirmWorks asked, how do you deal with the struggles of working with family?
Well, yeah, it's complicated working with family.
I'm sure.
When my uncle was here, there was more wrinkles in it, kind of the more people in it, the more interesting things can get. Working just with my dad, I think he's brilliant. I think that we work really well together. He's been my mentor. I learned from him. He says that he learns from me. We think the same a lot, but he is coming from a different standpoint. Also, just the guy who writes the checks. Obviously, he's gonna have a different way of looking at it. It's funny how he's 78, I'm 42, and sometimes he's the one that's more bold as far as, yeah, let's just go buy this. Yeah, there's these 5 machines in Japan. And just buy it and we'll worry about it when it gets here. We'll figure it out. Versus some people are more, everything's got to be perfect if they're going to buy it. And, I think that there's a good happy medium. I think that we share we have some different skill sets. I think we work really well together, and I could see how other people wouldn't work well with their parents.
Have you found any good ways of dealing with disagreements? Because, like when you're dealing with a boss that's not your father or not someone related to you, it's kind of easier to remain professional, I would imagine. So are there any ways that you guys have found to work together to avoid kind of slipping into those familial roles when you're disagreeing?
You're going to think I'm full of crap, but we really are able to, like, once in a while he'll be like, no, we're doing this. And I'll just be like, all right, but it's never like been like, idiot, like, can't believe he's doing that. And then things build up. And I mean, we really keep things good where we might disagree on a decision, but eventually one of us just is like, all right, well, we'll do that. So
that's great, though. I mean, it sounds like you guys start from a base of like mutual trust and respect, and like that kind of makes things flow easier.
I mean, the problem, one thing, and I haven't really mentioned this in any interviews, as great as we get along, I don't know how other people may receive that. Like, I don't know. I'm sure there's certain feelings about it, like he's entitled, or of course he's going to agree with him. I'm projecting what people may think. That said, when some people are like, well, what do you think of this? I can be sort of like the spokesperson to go, hey, what about this? And he goes, oh, yeah, why not? Obviously, you're seen a certain way by your coworkers. You're not exactly their coworker, like a normal coworker. I don't own the company, so I'm not their boss. It puts me in a sort of interesting gray area.
But you clearly work in the business too, and it's a long-standing family business. It's not like, you are the first familial hire that you guys have ever had. I mean, this is a long-standing family business, so they kind of knew how the lay of the land was when they hired on, and they found out the backstory of the company.
Yeah, that's true. Though some people here have been here before I came on.
But I mean, then it was still your dad and his father, and it's
That's true. That's true. But their dynamic is different than our dynamic, and so yeah, you have a good point.
Well, so you kind of mentioned that you've been going on podcasts. For FirmWorks' other question was, how does it feel to be on the other side of the mic? Because you're so used to interviewing people.
I think it's fun. I always have to have some kind of project hanging over my head. And the last thing I did, I went a whole year meeting at least one new person every day and then documenting it. And I was hoping to make like a book and a podcast out of it. I had a selfie with most of them too. And
that's cool.
Website. But usually, it was me sort of being on the passive side. letting people talk, and it's good. It's interesting, like I'll talk to people on the phone and I'd be taking notes, and it's amazing how much people enjoy being listened to. I love meeting people, and I love doing the podcasts, but it's fun to get to put more of myself in it as well. I want to put my own personality a little bit into the podcast, so I hate to just be totally passive. And I think I don't know, part of me wants to show people my voice a little bit. But that said, you can't be a windbag. You can't let it. We just released a podcast today episode, and I thought it was really good. It was with this woman who's a recruiter. Her name is Ann Wyatt. And we got in this pretty interesting discussion about interviews, job interviews. And I've done a lot of reading, and people have said, job interviews are rather overrated. And she differed with me on that. And we ended up talking probably 10, 12 minutes about this and doing role playing. And I mean, the interview was pretty long, and I do cut my interviews a little bit. And then I listened to it and I was just like, look, you're being self-indulgent a little bit. And once in a while, my dad and I will host, we'll just make an episode that's just ourselves, just talking to one another. Have you ever done an episode? Well, you used to have a partner. Did you guys do episodes where it was just you two, or did you always interview somebody?
Yeah, so we did every other week was either him and I or him and I and a guest.
Nice. And what did you think people were the most receptive to?
I honestly, what I've learned about having an audience is that it seems like it's always split down the middle. Like when we talked about length. Like
I know. I couldn't believe what you told me.
Yeah. Well, so for the listeners, when Noah and I talked about the podcast beforehand, we had a call a week or so ago. He edits his down to keep them short and concise. And I was telling you that, if I do under an hour, people are like, well, where's the rest of it?
Well, you have different expectations. People have become accustomed to your podcast. So they're,
Right. And I think that it went that way too with the guest versus just us. And like, we had some people who were like, oh man, I love the guest interviews, but like the shop ones are meh. And then I had some people that were like, man, the guest interviews are whatever, but like, I really like hearing both of you guys talk about it. And so,
how long were the ones that you guys did?
About an hour and a half, something like that.
Oh, the one you talked amongst yourself was an hour and a half.
Yeah, about that.
That's good for you though. Cause I do every other week now, generally. And, before I became a father 7 months ago, I tried
Congrats.
to do, thank you. I tried to do every week. Maybe I'd do 5 of 7 weeks or something. And it was a real grind, as you know, and it was even harder because I really wanted to take the episodes down. People were complaining. I send it out with our blog newsletter, and a lot of the people are older, and that may have influenced me too. And they're like, I don't have time to listen to this. You have to keep in mind that there are podcast listeners and there are not podcast listeners. I guess they're not going to listen either way, right?
Well, and that's why you do a great job of putting out clips on LinkedIn and stuff of like very important parts of the conversation.
I'm trying, but looking at my numbers, I feel like the ones that are a half hour, 35 minutes often do the best. And I also feel like if I'm trying a new show, I may be intimidated by the ones that are the longest. And I'll probably go down the list and be like, this one's a half hour. Oh, let's do this
start
one.
with that one. Yeah. Okay. Hey, yeah. You told me that on the phone call, and that made sense to me. And it actually explains, I think the first or the second episode is one of the highest listened. It's not the highest, but it is like in the top 5, I think. And so it probably
Isn't that
makes
amazing?
sense.
That was with us too. The first episode got like a ton.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are podcast completists. And so they're like, I'll listen to the first one, and if I like it, I'll keep going and I'll listen to them all. Otherwise, I'm just not going to do it. Like, I know a lot of people who listen to the full breadth of a podcast and don't skip anything. And so, they probably start at the first one and they're like, okay, well, I like that. Let's keep going. Or they're like, well, that was it. Thanks.
Really? I'm not like that.
So. I'm not either, but
maybe it's
I could
because
see
you
it.
and I subscribe to so many podcasts that we have to just be like, all right, this one's really speaking to me. This one maybe less so.
Right.
Do you,
Yeah. I mean, I know I've had episodes that I'm like, this is good, but I have better, Usually it has to do with my performance more than anything. I'm like, oh, wow, I was really sleepy that night. Or like, oh, I was really out of it that day and was not a good host.
really?
Oh, yeah, I can definitely tell. Like, I'll listen back and like people, I rarely have people reach out and say, you did a bad job or something along those lines, but I'll listen back to the edit and be like, oof, I should have got 3 hours more sleep that night or something.
Really, Dylan? I don't think people are. I think people probably aren't paying. I mean, maybe I don't. I think it's more, and maybe it's, yeah. They're not going to criticize you. You know yourself. Maybe, yeah. Maybe I didn't bring out what I could have in this person. I could see how you might think that.
Yeah, I'm always going to be my harshest critic. I mean, I have now listened to 170 episodes almost of my self-talk.
This
And
is
so it's like,
I just came out with 170 today myself.
oh, really? Yeah, you're 169, so I'm one behind you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to analyze it. I'm going to be on somebody else's podcast. I was just talking to them and they were like, "Yeah, I listened to a few of them. I listened to the third one." And I was like, "The third one? Don't listen to that one. I was just starting." Like,
that's what I always tell people too. I'm like, no, I'm so much better in the later episodes.
You don't do pre-interviews.
No, I don't.
But besides the one with me.
Besides the one with you. And so I was realizing, I was thinking about this last night, and I think the reason I don't is I find the joy of discovery far outweighs the possible awkwardness an interview can have.
Yeah, and you're less worried about length.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, so you were mentioning that you're going to be on a podcast. Our next segment is Shop News and New Things. Where can people look for you next? And then also, what else is new in your life?
Well, I mean, you don't need to go to these other podcasts. You should just go to mine, Swarfcast.
Of course.
But I talked to this guy yesterday. He is very interesting. His podcast is called like Mindful Manufacturing. Have you ever heard of him?
I haven't. No, I'll have to check it out.
Manufacturing mindfulness? I don't know. And
if I can find it, I'll put it in the show description for people. I like, as far as I'm concerned, there's no competition in this space. There is just more to listen to.
I think that you're totally right, and I think that I've had the wrong. I might have had the wrong attitude for a little while, like sort of jealousy, or like looking at iTunes or Apple Podcasts and going, they have 100 subscribers, 100 ratings, and I listen to theirs, and their production quality isn't that good, and like, how dare they? And I've really changed. I've grown up a little and realized, these people are my allies and friends, and don't be such a jerk. Like,
yeah, well, it's not a zero-sum game. I mean, there's 168 hours in a week. Like, there's not enough machining podcasts or manufacturing podcasts to fill up even all the waking hours. And
I suppose.
I think as far as podcast goes, there are more people who listen to many podcasts than just one podcast. Like, I don't think that people are like, this is my podcast, and
Some people with mine tell me I'm the only one that they listen to.
Really?
But maybe it's that I was sort of the gateway, and then they discover other ones after me. I don't know. I still think I'm caught in this terrible attitude of, well, how many machining podcasts are they going to listen to? They're either going to listen to Dylan's podcast or my podcast. I don't want to lose any ears to him. But it's BS.
No, I talk to so many people who are like, every time a new machining podcast comes out, they're commenting on the first post, and they're like, yes, more content. Like, I find it super comforting. Like, I put on a lot of friends' podcasts. Like, a couple of my friends are on Carbide Content, it's called, and it's a knife making machining podcast. And like, the conversations they have, I just have playing while I'm working, and it's like kind of like having friends in the shop. Like,
yes,
I can't talk back, but it's like having friends in the shop. And like, for a while before my business partner came on full time, I was alone in the shop, and so like, my podcast friends were the only friends that I had in the shop.
Totally. Well, that's for all kinds of podcasts. Yeah, you feel like you know them, and you feel like they're sort of your friends. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So it's
because you're hearing
I
a
think.
conversation. It's almost like you're part of this conversation.
Oh yeah. Well, that brings me to the last question I ask every guest every week, which is, what have you been researching this week? And it doesn't have to be machining related or manufacturing related. It's just what's been popping up in your browser. It's always cool to see what other people in
Oh.
the industry are looking up.
Good question, because I have sort of a similar one with my podcast. This question may be better than mine, though, because I always ask, what's something you've learned recently?
Oh, I like that too.
This is a little easier, I think, because so many people, I think it's kind of sad. They just go, no, I haven't really learned anything recently. And then I try to jog their memory. Like, I write in a diary every night, and I keep a list of one thing I've learned that day. Try to, you learn a ton of things every day, particularly if you listen to a lot of podcasts. So I tried to alter my question it was like, what have you learned, or what's something that you've watched or you've read recently that, had an emotional effect on you or whatever. Okay, so what have I researched? One thing, work related, as I said, we bought these machines in Japan, a bunch of Citizens and a wire EDM, and I kept looking around for other machines in Japan, seeing what was available. So that was one thing. I kept asking people, can we change the units into inches from metric, and how difficult is it to change the language? And then yesterday we bought this wire EDM as well, and all of a sudden it dawned on me. It was like, I think it's going to work, this Fanuc RoboCut wire EDM, but we never talked to Fanuc. Like,
oh boy.
Well, we talked to a few other people, dealers, who thought it was an okay idea. So I started looking up specs for that, and then.
Well, you mentioned you listen to a lot of podcasts. Is there something you've been listening to a lot of recently that shares a lot of information or you find interesting?
Sure. That's why I just started opening up my podcast app. There's this podcast called Against the Odds, which is about these crises where, the first one was about the boys that were trapped in the cave in Thailand, and they, did the whole process of whatever. And now I'm listening to this one about this submarine in 1939. The Army had created, or the Navy had created, their two new technological submarines, something totally different than they had ever done before. And one of them was doing a practice dive, and something goes wrong on the practice dive, and it's trapped underwater, and they have, a couple hours before they just die of suffocation. And so this is about the rescue of it. 1939, them trying to rescue people out of a submarine that's on the bottom of the ocean. And that was pretty fun.
That's really cool.
I can give you the name of the episode. So it's Against the Odds. It's called Submarine Rescue, The Race to Save Squalus.
Okay. How cool.
It's fun. It's, and this company that does it, Wondery, they have, it's just really good. Sort of like you're listening to a play, and it's almost like voices and there's music, and it's just really well produced. It's like you're listening to a real episode of something entertaining.
That's awesome. I'll have to check it out.
Not just a bunch of talking heads like me.
Well, Noah, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. It's been great. Where can people find you again if they want to listen to your podcast or read about you?
Yeah. Well, first, if you need a used machine of any sort, particularly turning equipment, go to Graff-Pinkert.com. Graff as in Frank, Pinkert. If you want to read our blogs, which we send out every week, including the podcast, that's at todaysmachiningworld.com. And then if you want to listen to the podcast, and I hope some people will try it out from this, It's called Swarfcast. So it's SWARF and then CAST. And you knew what Swarf was, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
like the chips and the crap that's inside the belly of the machine.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think people should have no problem finding that if they're listening to this podcast.
Thank you, Dylan. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for letting me yap and getting to know me. I think you're a really good interviewer. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And again, I really appreciate your time. Thanks to all the Patreon members who make this show possible. And I will be back next week.